Sorry, Carlton King is a former Scotland Yard Special Branch and MI6 officer and the author of Black Ops.
I was undercover for Special Branch in a jihadi organisation.
My name is Carlton King, and welcome to the Black Spy Podcast, the show that shines a light on the world of secret intelligence, national security, and armed governmental personal protection operations, but actually looks at geopolitics in the round. Today's episode is part 2 of an episode that I started last week.
So this guy's come in, he's a reporter, he's done the 7 weeks training, he comes into the police station at Charing Cross, and for 7 months he acts as a custody detention officer, right, under the custody officer. And all the time whilst he's there, he's recording secretly. And he sees things that he says he doesn't like. Now, don't get me wrong, I have no problem whatsoever with a whistleblower. Indeed, I think it's totally correct to be a whistleblower. But he's not a whistleblower, is he? He's somebody who's come in to make a covert film which they're going to put on the BBC. Right? That's not a whistleblower. No. That's somebody who already has a perspective. And the film is not there to say how great police are. The film is to say how negative they are. So therefore, if he films and there's nothing there, they've wasted a reporter for 7 weeks, so 8 months, 9 months of waste of a reporter. So you know they're looking for the negative. They're not looking for the positive.
It's not a balanced report.
Exactly.
No.
It's not reporting as one would think it should be. No, they're looking for the negative. So they go through on this and he sees several things which he thinks are incorrect. Having done much undercover work myself, I would tell you that one of the things which he does is he acts as an agent provocateur. Because he's going around saying to him, oh, and do you think this, and what if, oh yeah, and if he does this. Now, for those who know me, I'm not a swearer. I don't swear, I never really have done. Well, I never have done. Maybe the latest I've done more swearing than any, but I don't really swear. Full stop, that's one of my things. I don't know why, well, my parents taught me that way. The parlance today is that a lot of people swear. And a lot of people use words that I wouldn't use. So in my time in the past, police generally might not have used the word, but that's normal parlance. And I can tell you, ladies and gentlemen, that I've worked a lot with government, I've worked a lot with the legislature, MPs, etc., and they swear like troopers. Right? So let's clarify that bit. Civil servants, they're swearing like troopers. Yes, they swear in a better voice. Yeah. Flipping heck. And it's not flipping heck is what I'm saying. That's what I'm saying, right? So they'll swear in a better voice, but it's still swearing, right? So that'll be used. So they're using the parlance of the everyday person on the street as a general rule, the police officers. And so that, can be a little bit, if you're not a swearer, it can rub you a little bit in the wrong way. So these are guys using that language. But the reality is, they had an incident whereby a sergeant stepped on somebody's leg, questionable whether he did or he didn't. But the important factor of that was that custody detention officer wasn't there at the incident. He learnt that from a police officer whom he befriended and started talking to him, what incidents have happened and what's gone on, blah, blah, blah. I'll let you watch the programme so you can make your own decisions. But he learnt that from him. He then goes to an official police system, computer, and brings up the film of that instance. Because if you don't know, all of the custody areas are all cameraed and all sound. It's all there in the Met, in Charing Cross Police Station. So he brings that up, he films it on his secret filming camera, right? And then subsequently puts it out on the BBC. Do you see any offences there?
Definitely. From my recent time in dealing with misconduct, at the very, very least, that is misuse of police systems. That is not for a policing purpose. The police CCTV is a police system, and he is not using it for a policing purpose. He has nothing to do with that investigation. I have personally come across cases where people have accessed systems without a policing purpose, but probably with more of a purpose than this guy has, and they've been subject to misconduct proceedings and have been dismissed. There's also other offences, maybe data protection offences, where you could look at criminal offences, but at the very, very minimum, as an employee, I say that in inverted commas, because although technically he was, he really wasn't or shouldn't have been, but on the face of it, he got that job, he was being employed and paid by the police, he should have been brought up on some discipline charges or even criminal charges. But the point of this show is that is all overlooked, and it just focuses on this occasion, a conversation following a few drinks in a pub with an officer.
Correct. And most of what he has is a conversation with a few drinks with an officer saying that, one of them says, I hate Somalis, and what I'd do to them is I'd sort them all out. Another one says that people that, I won't use the language they're using, but just let's say, I think he said shag and rape. I'll use that, but he's got expletives in between. What I'd do to them is I'd cut their penis off and let them bleed out. Well, that was shown as evidence of this individual being racist, as far as this guy saw it, and evidence that the police was institutionally racist. Now, to my mind, first and foremost, is he really going to chop somebody's member off and allow him to bleed out, even if he had the power to do so? Well, that's the first thing. So this guy's in a pub saying this. Now, what I found more disturbing was there was a temporary ex-chief constable on there who started saying, this is outrageous what he's saying. Now, it might be in terms of who wants that language, but of course this guy's in a pub talking to a colleague, as far as he's concerned, having downed X amount of pints and saying nonsense, which we know he's never going to put in place. It can show that this guy's got a particular bent against certain races or against certain colours of individuals. But it could also show as simple as, let me just think off the top of my head. Okay, so let's argue you are a devout Christian, and you go to church on a Sunday, and in fact it goes even further. You are a lay reverend or a lay priest, and on your Sunday you say that man should not lie with man, etc., etc., etc. Right? Because that's what you're reading from the Testament. Do you come in from church on a Monday to the police and they say, that's outrageous, you should be fired? Right? Because that's your opinion now. Your opinion is that you don't believe that's right. So, can you now be an officer? Have we got to the level where what we're saying is, if you hold any opinion that is against what we think is correct, now I'm a black guy, I'll say it again, I don't want people who are racist, but the bottom line is, you cannot turn around to everybody at 24 hours of a day, every day, and suggest they can't say anything that might be perceived by the hierarchy coming from governmental it's not even the perspective of the government. It's more a government edict that one should work or be in a certain frame of mind, but your frame of mind isn't exactly that frame of mind. Hence I chose Christianity. I could choose Islam, I could choose Judaism. They're all preaching around about the same type of thing, which would be homophobic, right? It is what it is. That's what it would be if you believe in the book, right? If that was your belief. So could you turn around and say none of these people should be officers? What's your opinion on that?
Again, I think it's a fine line. You hear people talk about freedom of speech and freedom of expression and the right to hold your own opinions, which and I get that. I personally don't think it's right to hold any opinions that are homophobic or racist or sexist. And I'd like to think that I don't hold any of those. Particularly in terms of sexism and misogyny. As a father of two daughters, I want there to be no glass ceiling for them in their lives. I want them to be as successful as any man in their careers, and that applies across the board, whether it's just my daughters, whether it's a black person, whether it's a gay person, whoever. But in reality, are we really going to try and say that in an organisation like the police, we are going to root out anybody that might even hold a view like that and sack them? If they do something that affects their work and they act inappropriately in their work, then that puts a different slant on it. But also it raises the question, like we've mentioned earlier, about the police being singled out. If we are wanting to single out every single police officer that might have a view that we don't agree with, why aren't we doing it to every other profession?
This is what I was going to get to. People who listen to the show know that I'm the most kind of leftish leading type of fella, and who believes in all of the opportunities for all individuals, right? However, the reality has got to be sensible. You cannot suggest, because I know I can walk, right, again, I like to give proper examples. So when I worked in the Secret Intelligence Services as a case officer, MI6 as a case officer, I come in, my boss who ran the counter-terrorism section, he says to me, he says, the Met, constitutionally racist, institutionally racist, bloody terrible, this is outrageous. I mean, they got great people like you, and I'm quoting what he said, so I'm not just, that's what he said to me, they've got great people like you, but yet still somehow, they're not treating them right. So I said to him something dead simple. Okay, I'm looking around. Now, for those of you who don't know, a case officer is basically the guy who carries out the James Bond rule. He's a guy who works together, or gal, and puts an operation together, is tasked by the organisation to destroy or seek out or recruit agents into a particular area. And by agents, I mean informants in a particular area, and then destroy the organisation. That's his role, and he has a team around him, or teams around him, that provide him with that knowledge and that capacity to be able to do it, from listening to people or whatever it might be. Right, so I've got this role as a case officer. So I turned around to him and I said, right, as I look at it now, I haven't seen another black person in this organisation who isn't a cleaner, right, or isn't working in the canteen, right? And I don't mean as a chef, right. So I'm a detective inspector in the Metropolitan Police, and I know there are other people who are some higher than me. So yes, the Met isn't all fonts, all great, and I've had problems myself with racism in the Met. However, you can't just tar them and say they're institutionally racist when I look at this organisation. Now, you have nothing to say, right? Right? Because you see, it's very easy for people, and particularly with our class system, for people of a certain class to look down at the police who they see as another class and suggest that they are, somehow negative. And in the era I was talking about, you would have been, I wouldn't have ever seen a black judge, or a judge of any other colour than white, or, any leading capacity in anything. So what I'm trying to say is it's easy for people to come out and say, oh, look at them, but what they're not looking at is the reality of what goes with it. And I actually do the same in terms of now sexuality and in terms of gender. Because when I look at the police now, I see a hell of a lot of chief constables who are women. The commissioner was a woman. Most of the senior management actually is probably women. And in some forces, I think now, is it West Midlands who's 65% women? Right? So, but we're still talking about the bad policemen. Right? When I say we, I'm talking the media. They're pushing a position on, policemen, right? Not police women. So if I take you to this Vikram incident the other day, whereby the young lad at 18 years of age was stabbed by a Sikh who was said to have stabbed him utilising his ceremonial dagger, which actually it wasn't. But that's what he's said to have done by the media. And therefore then there became this big cry, should Sikhs have this opportunity to carry the kaftar because it's ceremonial, because they can kill people with it. I mean, if you look at incidents, you'll find that there are practically extremely few incidents where that actually ever happens. And even with this guy, the Sikhs say that wasn't what he used to stab him with. Right? So you've got that incident. But more importantly, how do you feel the officer functioned and his two colleagues functioned when there was two female colleagues, you can hear the voices, when they dealt with this incident? What were your thoughts on it?
Firstly, I think when people look at this incident with hindsight, and hindsight's a wonderful thing, and people watch the video or read witness accounts time and time again, it's very easy to say, oh, the officer shouldn't have done that. And whilst there may be some wrongdoing on the officer, I don't know, because there's going to be an investigation, and hopefully the correct decision will come out as to whether they're going to face any misconduct or anything else. But what I will say, as an officer who's been there, when you're out on a shift and there's mention of weapons and there's injuries and tempers are high, your adrenaline kicks in, and it's very, very easy to sit back on a Monday morning at 9 o'clock and say, well, you shouldn't have done that, or you should have done this, which I've seen throughout my career. And it is also, and I'm pretty sure the trial judge made mention of this, that it's not uncommon for people who are being arrested and cuffed to falsify the fact they've got an injury to try and stop the cops using force and de-arrest them. So when this poor lad has allegedly said, I've been stabbed, and the cop said, I don't think you have, or words to that effect, then it turns out the lad had been stabbed, and the ending was absolutely tragic. But at the time, I don't know what was going through that officer's mind. Maybe the lad was struggling, and sometimes, again, we get this taught in our self-defence training, sometimes people will struggle because they're injured and they're fighting for their life, but it presents as violence towards the officer, and in the split second, in the heat of the moment, it can be difficult to differentiate. And in this case, it looks like a mistake was made and the guy had been stabbed. I don't know how quick the officers uncuffed him and tried CPR. I don't know if his injuries were so severe that he would have died anyway, or whether he could have been saved. That's a what if conversation. But what I'm saying is, until you've walked a mile in someone's shoes, it's difficult to judge how they should or shouldn't act. And like I say, I've only seen little bits on the news. I haven't seen the video, so it's difficult to say what's happened. But what I would say is, there are so many people very, very quick to condemn that officer for what they did or didn't do. And I think let's wait for all the information to come out. Let's wait for the investigation to conclude before we start making big judgments about what the officers did or didn't do.
Well, the problem is you can't wait, because Nigel Farage steps up straight away and talks about two-tier policing.
Yeah.
Right, so that's the first thing he did. He spoke about two-tier policing. The officers came in, and before they'd done anything else, they arrested the white guy. Now, I saw the video, the full video as far as we know it. Obviously, there'll be cam video which will probably show it better. But from what I saw, the negative of the officer was that he handcuffed him. Because I saw no movement from that guy on the floor. So when he comes into him, the officer comes in, from what we see from that video, the guy's slumped over on the floor, right? And the officer says, you know, what? And he arrests him. You're arrested because he asked what the score was, and they said this and this and this happened. But more importantly, they've already put the call in, the two fellas of Asian heritage, because the two Brits who happen to be of Asian heritage, right? They put the call in, and they basically say, this guy's come along, he's drunk, he's punched my brother, right? He's punched my brother, and my brother's tried to get him back, and as he's running away, he falls over a bin. This is what he says. He falls over a bin, and he's at his head. So the dispatcher says, do you need an ambulance? And he says, yeah, I think we do. Said, have any knives or anything been used? And he says, no knives, no nothing. So he's giving the dispatcher a view of what's happened already, which is then transmitted to the officer, right?
Yeah.
So the officer comes in, sees this fella on the floor, who he's now thinks he's fallen over, that's him on the floor, and he cuffs him and says, when he says, I've been stabbed, I don't think so, mate. Doesn't say you haven't, he says, I don't think so, mate. Right? One of the female officers said, you better search just in case. right? So she says, absolutely correct. So he starts looking. Now, what was interesting to me is that he sits him up because the fella starts saying, I've been stabbed, I'm dying, I've been stabbed. Now, he picks him up because he thinks, I don't know, of positional asphyxia, which you're aware of. And when you've cut somebody's arms behind the back, positional asphyxia can come in, and every police officer's had that video, blah, 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 they all know it. And we had it from the flying squad in the Met. So the point I'm making is, at that stage, he's thinking, right, there's a problem. He then at some stage releases the handcuffs. I don't know where that comes along. But the point is, by then it's too late. So my position has always been, the only thing that I thought that officer did wrong was to handcuff him. No problem with saying you're under arrest, if that's what you think's happened. Maybe I would have said, you speak to him a little bit more, you speak to that guy over there a little bit more, I don't know. But anyway, he's made his arrest. Because you can always de-arrest somebody, as you know.
Absolutely.
You can always de-arrest somebody.
Yeah.
So he's made his arrest, right? But the guy's never really saying, the young lad dying, he's never saying anything about the case, never doing anything. So I thought he was a little bit quick. Now, the other side to that is, having had a brother who taught officer safety training, is that there's more and more putting handcuffs on people now these days than what they used to be. So, and you can do that if you think that there may be a problem to you from an individual who's been violent. Preemptively, you can do that. So, again, which way does it run? It's not a science, policing. It's an art, if anything. So the question is, as you say, how do you know what's the right move and what's the wrong move? How do you know what happened beforehand? How do you know what the lad had done beforehand to the two individuals? How do you know nothing's happened to them? You don't know. So when you're turning up, you don't know the situation. Firgas uses this and says it's two-tier policing. The white guy's not believed. The two Asians, they call them, I say Brits of Asian heritage, are believed. So where do we sit, and how do you see that in terms of policing?
I've heard the phrase bandied around, two-tier policing, and I don't fully understand what people mean with it. I mean, on this occasion, Firgas, as you would expect, is very quick to jump on the bandwagon and say the two Asians, but like you said, they are British guys, happen to be from Asian backgrounds. What that's got to do with it, I don't know, in terms of who you believe. It's not a case of you believe someone because they're black or because they're white or because they're Asian or because they're gay. You deal with what's put in front of you, and for the cops turning up, all they have is a situation that might be quite volatile, that there's been reports of a violence, and you have to make decisions in a split second that people like Nigel Farage can analyse and say you got that wrong. Now, if it turns out in the cold light today the cops did do something wrong and they get disciplined for it, that's a conversation to be had as part of the investigation. But I make the point again, when you deal with something, you have to make a decision in the blink of an eye, a split second, and you're not always going to get it right. And even if you do, and also sometimes you can act absolutely correctly. Just because an outcome further down the line is bad doesn't always mean what you've done at the time is wrong. There can be situations where you act correctly, but something's going to happen that couldn't have been prevented. But I think the two-tier thing, it scares me for the future of not only policing but our country. There's a big divide being made in this country between what people class as white English people and everybody else, basically, in the word, with the way that Farage and his party are doing it. All this business about stop the boats and various things, it's just drumming up a lot of hatred, and that hatred is also presenting itself in policing, because, like we've said before, the police are an easy target for the media, for social media, and we're being used as a tool, basically, to further this agenda that Farage and his party have. And I personally find it quite worrying.
You see, I go a step further, because I'm actually in the belief that it's all people against all people now. It's sexes against sexes, races against races, genders against genders, etc., etc. Everybody's now been put into this position whereby you've got to be against somebody. And the irony of a Northern Irish Catholic walking down the road after a guy in the street saying, "I'm going to burn you out," in Belfast, is, you know, something which was happening to them but 30 years ago. It's just irony of ironies. Mm-hmm. So the point is this though, that's what you get when you let the lid off a situation, and all politicians are doing it. Farage, but all of them are playing it. Kemi Badenoch's playing it. They're all playing this game. Starmer's playing it. They're all playing the game, which is a very, very dangerous game, because in the end, you end up with a society and fizzes in society that you can't control. People seem to think it's very difficult for civil war to come about. It isn't, actually, having worked in that area all my life. For civil disobedience to happen on a massive scale is not difficult. The problem is you just need a few catalysts to keep running. And this is what's going on. And the reason why I mention this as well is because when on this incident in Charing Cross Police Station, on this very programme I was telling you about, they basically said something like, Baroness Casey, who was looking into this, who said the Met is institutionally racist, is institutionally homophobic and institutionally misogynist. Basically, what she said is that crimes against women and girls are not being given priority. But that's what you just mentioned, two-tier policing. Now, why would I give priority to crimes against, use the word priority, against crimes against women and girls when 70% of the people who are murdered are men? Right? For those who don't know, I did a degree in criminology, and I can tell you all the figures that you want to know about what the crimes are. Yes, 90% of the crimes are committed by men, but 70% of the crimes are men. Now, for women who generally get killed, basically 8 times out of 10, right? In fact, it might be 9% are actually perpetrated by a partner, a husband, a family member, right? Or somebody they were intimate with, who's none of those, but, you know, they were intimate with that person at some stage. That's generally who kills a woman, right? Whereas for men, oftentimes, it's actually an outsider who they do not know. They've gone into a pub, they've gone into the street, they've got whatever, or, you know, there's some drugs-related aspect, again, something they might not know, or other crime-related aspect. So what I'm trying to say is that if you were then just to say, we'll prioritise women and girls, you'd be missing the vast majority of crime. So how can that be done? So we've got the people looking into these things. Let's be very careful about how they say things and about how they say whether it is racism, misogyny, whatever. You know, you can't just orientate the way you police to a functional view of what you think society should be like. So we've been quite a long time on it, and I'm conscious of the time, and I'm probably going to have to make 2 episodes out of it. But what I do want to do is just ask you a few questions about your DPS aspect. Because I think, again, the other thing is people think that there's a hell of a lot of corruption in the police, a hell of a lot of criminality in the police, and a hell of a lot of facility for the police to cover it up. Mm. My view, for what it's worth, and I want you to tell me if I'm correct or not, is that actually police go out of their way to find people who are involved with problems rather than trying to cover it up for themselves. So, you know, can you tell me a little bit about the DPS where you were and and how you saw the DPS? Yeah.
Firstly, my role in our professional standards team was I was responsible for arranging the misconduct hearings. So another department would do the investigation. Okay. It would go to a senior officer for a decision as to whether there's a case to answer. Then it would come to me, and I would arrange the hearing, get the barristers involved and the bench and everything. So that was my role. So I wasn't involved in investigations, but I did have a really big overview of all the cases that came through our department. And like's just been said, I think there's more likelihood now of things being brought to the attention of the professional standards team than try to cover up. So much so that in my force, over recent years, the Police Federation and other people have actually said there should be better training for sergeants and inspectors to deal with low-level matters at source and deal with it in-house. I don't mean cover it up, I mean deal with it correctly, but at the correct level. When I was a sergeant and inspector, I dealt with matters that could be and should have been dealt with by your first level or second level supervisor without going straight to professional standards. So now, the point I'm making is, we don't cover it up. Everything now is getting sent straight to professional standards for a formal investigation.
And the reason for that is because the senior management, the science inspectors, etc., are protecting themselves. Is that the reason?
I believe so. I believe that they think they won't have the backing to make those decisions themselves. So they're saying the easy option is send it up the chain of command, and it's somebody else's problem there. Right. And that is one thing where there's a bit of a trust issue, and senior managers feel that they won't get the support and won't get that support to make decisions that they should be making. And secondly, in terms of criminality, when I was there was only one case, and I can speak about it because all police misconduct, unless there's a good reason, are public and the officers are named. It all goes out on the website. There was one officer that was prosecuted and sacked for supplying drugs. There have been one or two officers where there have been allegations of sexual offences. They've not been things like rape or sexual assault. It's been what's been deemed as an inappropriate relationship with somebody they met at work, whether it's a victim. And people have their own views on that. If there are direct vulnerabilities with the victim, then fair enough. But there are some people think just because you met someone as part of your duties and you happen to form a relationship, is that right? Is that wrong? I suppose there's a grey area.
So are you dealing with that though as a professional standards person? So
the officers in the investigations team would be, yeah.
They would deal with that?
Yeah.
So what they're basically saying is that there's a blanket ban on anybody meeting anybody outside the service?
Don't. I mean,
Can that be correct?
I don't know. I mean, I suppose it depends. I mean, they would say it could. A lot of the cases they would investigate them as misconduct in a public office. Now, if you're dealing with a vulnerable victim and there are real vulnerabilities and you form a relationship, then yeah, I can see why they would investigate and maybe prosecute or have a misconduct hearing for that. Because if somebody's vulnerable,
what do you mean by that? Can you explain for the public?
Well, it can mean a lot of it. It could mean somebody who's got some maybe learning difficulties, in which case, yes, that's a big no-no. It could be somebody who's been the victim of maybe stalking, violence, sexual offences, and they see the officer as their saviour and develop a bit of an attachment, which again is probably not healthy. But then you could also have the one where you go to somebody's house who's reported a burglary. There's two single people, the officer and the victim. They strike up a conversation, they get on, they go and meet for a drink. People have been investigated for things like that. So again, I mean, I think it is now the police service in general are under so much pressure to say, look, we're dealing with and rooting out everything, that I think a lot of things now come to be investigated that wouldn't have several years ago. Sometimes quite rightly so. Sometimes you've got to think, are their attentions better focused elsewhere? But the vast majority of cases that came through while I was there were not criminal matters, they were misconduct matters. And
can you give us examples of misconduct other than what you just said?
Yeah, most of the hearings that I ended up dealing with were accessing police systems for a non-policing purpose. Right. For example, we had one case where this young officer, they knew that their dad had got a conviction from years before. They didn't know what it was. I think because he'd said, I've got a conviction from years ago, I hope that doesn't stop you. It didn't stop the vetting. They got into the job, but one day they were doing some
wanted to know what his dad
distance learning at home on the laptop. I mean, to be fair to the officer, they included that on their vetting, that they thought their dad had got a conviction. And one day, curiosity got the better. They searched the father on the police system for however it got flagged up and it got detected, and the officer got dismissed. And the sad thing about it is, at training school, I mean, access to police systems and computers are a lot more accessible to frontline officers now than when you and I were young officers. Most officers now have their own laptop. We used to have to go to the control room or the intelligence team to do checks. Now everyone has direct access. So it's drilled into you several times at training school, do not do this unless it's for a policing purpose. And unfortunately, a lot of...
Like that lad, he did it, it wasn't for policing purpose.
Oh,
Example,
the
reporter.
Absolutely.
Right, not at all for policing purpose.
Yeah, but all the people that have been investigated for that, when it's gone to a hearing, I'm not aware of one that didn't result in dismissal.
So, again, you would suggest that lad should have been dealt with.
I would think so, yeah.
Now, did any of them go into the criminal domain or no, that you've seen? In terms of what happened to them afterwards? Accessing police systems.
Not the ones that came to me directly. I seem to, because most of the ones that came to me, it was made clear on the case file that the information wasn't passed on. Now,
Gotcha.
I believe before I got there, anecdotally, I heard of a case where somebody was passing criminal intelligence on to some criminals, basically, which is direct corruption, and I think they ended up getting prosecuted.
Right. So this guy, you could argue, he passed it on to a national television programme in order to show it on television and talk about it on television.
Yeah.
So it could have just gone... Because firing him is no good, because he's a reporter.
Yeah,
he's been paid by the BBC, right?
Yeah.
So that's his job.
Yeah.
So all he's doing is trying to find some
Yeah.
dirt on the police.
Yeah.
So that's the thing. So that's an interesting thing, though. He knew that he shouldn't have been accessing that.
Yeah.
And of course, let me look at something else on that programme. Naming the names of officers whom he came across. How does that work?
Yeah. Well, I don't know. I mean, obviously, in policing terms, you would only name an offender once they've been charged. You don't name people if they're under investigation for criminal offences, which is a big thing that people ask on various police forces' social media pages. But he was very quick to mention that. I don't know in the world of reporting whether that breaches any of their
Well, the report
standards.
shouldn't have any other rights than anybody else, should it?
Yeah, in terms of criminal
reality.
offences, I don't know whether there are any criminal offences
Interesting.
offhand. I mean,
It's interesting.
yeah, but it's certainly... I mean, I'm not condoning if any of the officers, the undercover, did anything wrong, but the manner in which it happened, I think you've touched upon police undercover operations. If a police undercover operation acted like that in terms of entrapment and being an adjunct provocateur, there's no way it would have been allowed to be used in evidence or got to court. It would have been kicked out straight away. But this was allowed to go on national television, and again, like we said earlier, basically attack the character of these officers, and particularly the guy in the pub after a few drinks. It might have all just been a bit of a laugh, a bit of bravado. It might not have even been true, and yeah, it just goes to show that the police and the police officers throughout the country are just up there and open to be attacked.
So this was the last question I wanted to ask, because I'm conscious of your time, and thank you very much, Phil, for being part of it. The last question was, what do you think this does for police retention, for recruitment, and indeed for the mental capacity of officers? If an officer believes they cannot say anything at any stage, let's go back to this this reserve priest or reverend. If he believes that, fundamentally he's been brought up as a Catholic, right? Example, I use a Catholic because we know that's what it says in Catholicism. He's been brought up as a Catholic, and he totally believes that when he goes in and he takes his communion, he's having the holy water, which is the wine, which is the blood of Christ, and he's taking Christ's body. And he believes that because that's what he's meant to believe, because he's a Catholic. Mm-hmm. So he believes everything else what's being said. What does that do for his mental well-being if he thinks, because he's articulated, that he doesn't believe that man should lie with man and woman should lie with woman, right? Let me hasten to add, I'm not in any way, shape or means, really in any way, shape or means, religious. So I'm going to say that, even though I'm brought up to be religious, I'm not. So, but if this guy is to believe that, and he's acting as a lay priest in his time, is there room for him in the police? This is what I'm trying to say now.
Yeah.
Is there room for anybody who doesn't articulate or even believe what the prevailing position is, and what is that doing to people's mental capacity and mental well-being? And will that mean that you can't retain people, or even recruit them, to be fair?
I think that raises a couple of interesting issues, like the example you gave about somebody who has deep religious beliefs. If they actually believe what the Bible says, that a man shouldn't lie with a man, you've got to then question if that person is dealing with a victim who is a gay person, are they able to separate their religious beliefs from that and do professional service, or will there be some prejudice and will they do the job correctly?
I think there might be some prejudice.
There might well be. And to take it one step further, if you are a member of an organisation, a racist organisation, far right, you will not be allowed to be in the police. Now that racist organisation might just say, I don't like black people. They might say, however, I can separate that in my belief and I will do my job as an officer really well. I don't believe you can. But then again, is there any difference than being a member of a far-right organisation saying, I don't like foreigners, I don't like black people, to a really religious person saying, being gay is wrong? How can you separate your strong beliefs?
That's the point I'm making.
Yeah. And the other point you mentioned regarding retention, when you see things like this on the TV and everything you see on social media, I know, because I've still got friends in the police and I follow some police sites, the amount of mental illness problems that police are reporting now is off the charts. And anecdotally, when I was still doing the professional standards role, I was hearing via Police Federation reps that a lot of young officers now were almost scared to go out and lay hands on and do the job and arrest people, because it will be videoed, they will be on a hearing, it will be in social media, and we can't have a police force that are afraid to go out and catch the criminals and arrest them and lay hands on when you need to, because at the end of the day, it's a dangerous job. You do face violent people and you have to use reasonable force and lay hands on. And we're getting cops now that are scared to do that for fear of repercussions. Yeah. Now, that doesn't set a good tone for the future. People nowadays, like when I started, nobody ever left until they did their 30 years. Now, because of the pension changes have affected things, but also because of the stress involved and all the extra pressures and your name being all over social media, officers are leaving in droves well before they should.
In droves?
Yeah.
In droves?
You see resignations quite regularly. When I say in droves, I mean, even if there's... I know from my old team a few years ago, about 3 or 4 just from my old shift decided to resign halfway through the service because it just wasn't the job they thought it was going to be and the job they signed up for. And it just scares me that if the police are getting portrayed as being the bad guys all the time, it's going to have an effect on people in the job, on their mental well-being, and it will also put people off joining. And then we're going to have a police force where you're going to lose the experience because people will leave halfway through and you won't get the 20, 30 year experience people you need to be the leaders. And you're not going to then recruit the right sort of people. And it's a worry for the future. Something needs to be done.
See, anecdotally, what I heard from my brother who was a PC down in the Met, he was saying that 5 years was basically where a lot of people leave.
Yeah.
5 years.
I've heard that now. People are coming, they're doing 5, 6 years.
And they're thinking it's not what I thought it was, and they're burning out.
And even before that, I think people are now joining with the idea that I'll do 5 or 6 years, it'll look good on my CV for my career progression, then do something else.
Right. So you're training people up, which are quite expensive to train them up. And you're losing. Now, do you think also there's a training problem there? In terms of, it used to be the old 22 weeks residential. Do you think that was able to see through individuals? And do you think that doing these things, as you said before, people doing it at home on the computer or whatever it might be, the training sessions, do you think that that's a negative aspect? That you can't really see the people?
Yeah, I think so. Again, I can only speak from my experience, and having done my training back in the 80s, maybe I've got a bit of an old school view, but the residential training course for me I thought it was fantastic. I was 19. It's the first time I'd been away from home. The first couple of days, I wanted to go home because the sergeant shouted at me I didn't like it because I was a young lad. But it was the making of me. Because you were with your colleagues 24 hours a day, the discipline was there 24 hours a day. Even after your 9 to 5 in the classroom, you would go and eat your meals together. Yeah. You'd have to wear appropriate clothing. The sergeants and inspectors and above would always be looking at you. So for me, it was character building. It made me into a better person. Certainly made me into a better police officer. And also, all the trainers doing your training, each class in my training centre had 2 sergeants. So there were 2 experienced sergeants teaching us. Now, certainly in my old force, they have civilians teaching the job. Now, you can get a training qualification, which is fine. You can read what the law says, and you can give that knowledge to someone. It's like talking back about direct entry. Anybody could read the books and pass the inspector's exam because it's all knowledge based.
Yep.
Doing the job is a different
Yep.
matter. And what I think is a danger now is, all right, you can have someone who can impart all that knowledge to the young PCs, but you haven't got somebody who can contextualise it, give examples where they've done it.
Yes.
And I don't mean pull up a sandbag, I'll tell you a war story, kid. But it's this is like, can you put some context in that? What do you mean? Can you give me a practical example of where this legislation would apply? Your old school PC sergeants could say, yes, I dealt with this. Whereas your civilian members of staff, and it's not their fault, it's just the system,
absolutely.
they do a good job. They haven't got that experience to be able to then pass that on to the recruits. And I do think overall, don't get me wrong, in lots of ways police training will have improved. We've got the technology and lots of different ways to do it now. But I do think that old school personal touch with the experienced staff is somewhat missed.
I mean, just on that, because it's an area that I didn't really look into, Phil, when I was we were closing down. So I just have to hit on that because it's very, very important. Because I think that when we were talking about direct entrance and people coming through, and we spoke a little bit about how senior officers were created these days. What we didn't do in any way, shape or means is we didn't look at the examination process, and you've just mentioned it. So the problem I found with the examination process is that previously, in the Met at least, so I don't know what it's like in other forces, but the Met at least, what played a part in that process was, yes, you did the examination papers and whatever else it might be, but what played a part in that process initially was actually how you policed, what you did, what skills and capacity you did, what jobs you did in terms of, did you do any good jobs? Were you? And then I'd say, by the time it got to the 90s, earlier 90s in fact, maybe even, by the time it got to the 90s, early 90s, it started getting to the position whereby, mid-90s, 95, I can say it specifically. It started getting to the position whereby, actually, it didn't matter what you did. If you'd have saved somebody's life by going up against an armed criminal, taking the weapon off them, preventing this armed robbery, by talking a person off a roof at great danger to yourself, by doing exhaustive investigative work and working your way through and finding out, that needed to be done on that, none of that would have counted. All what was counted was, did you actually do something within the criteria of how the examination process wanted? So you got people getting, if you will, the rank, having done none of the work.
Yeah.
So we've now created a body of men and women who actually are probably not the best examples of policing. Would you agree with that?
I think so, to an extent. Yeah, I mean, the old the promotion system in my old force, you did the exam, and the exam in the old days was just a written law-based exam, one for sergeant, one for inspector. Then they moved on to a two-part exam, a written exam and a role-play exam, where you did, I think, around about 7 practical scenarios.
Correct. That's
now
the national one.
That was a slightly more experience-based one that you probably needed some experience to pass. Having said that, there were companies giving training courses in that one. You need to know the technique to pass the exam. That's more important than actually your experience. You need to read the cue, pick up on what you think the marking guide will have and hit those bullet points. So there was a technique to that. And then the next phase of it, certainly in my force, you would apply. Every year they would advertise for sergeants, inspectors. So you would apply. You would have to have the backing of your supervisors to say, yes, they've got the potential. Then it would be an interview. But even so, if you get on with your supervisors, they'll back you for the interview.
Exactly.
If you're a person that is good at interviews, you're going to sail through it. I've known people get promoted who I don't think they should be in that role. Likewise, I've seen people who are PCs who would make the best frontline sergeants but just couldn't get through the interview process. So It works both ways, I think, the promotion system, and you're never going to have a perfect system, because if it's all based on merit and recommendations, if you're best pals with your supervisor, you're going to get it. If you're not, you won't. And again, that's not based on your abilities, but if you're purely going on a half an hour quick interview and an exam, again, you're not really hitting all the key points that the people need to display for their potential for the next rank.
Well, that was the point. The Osprey system, which is what you were talking about, which everybody did, the one where you basically performed the role, you wrote the paper and then you performed the role in 7 different rooms or whatever it might be. The Osprey system was a good system if you utilised the system properly.
Yeah.
But what happened is because it was run by police, what tended to happen is that they saw the easiest way out. Does that person hit the bullet points?
Yeah.
Right? So you'd have people who basically didn't do any work but studied how to hit the bullet points. Right?
Exactly.
And they'd be promoted. Right?
Well, the first time I did the part 2 of the sergeant's exam, I went in there with the attitude, I'm an experienced PC, I know what to do, fine. I went in, dealt with it probably as I would have done in practice, and I didn't pass. The next time I went on a course, and the course told you basically, this is the technique you need to pass the exam, and I passed it.
And that's no good, you see, because it was designed for doctors, actually, that Osprey.
Yeah.
And it was a system whereby a doctor needed to know when they went to a different room what they were doing and the capabilities and what to do. So it was a system which was a complex system, but we simplified a complex system.
Yeah.
Right? And just say, hit the bullet points, mate, and you're good to go. Right? So, anyway, look.
I mean, in some cases it worked because you and I were amazing supervisors. So we didn't beat the system.
Yeah. You could argue, or maybe you could argue not. Who knows? But the point is, at the end of the day, this has been a fantastic podcast. And the reason why I'm hesitating, because I'm looking at the timings and it's going to be 2, because I'm going to have to split it in half, because it's an hour and 30 minutes. So, Phil, fantastic. I'd like to invite you back again at some other stage in the future, because we looked at some contemporary incidents and some contemporary aspects. But there's other areas that I think we haven't really got to grips with. And that was the whole area whereby we're talking about the public's view about what policing is, because I think that's where the downfall is going to come for most officers.
Yeah.
Because the public's view is basically not orientated by the police, it's orientated by what they think the police are. So I leave you with this point, and thank you very much for your time. At this point is that I can remember my brother saying that he had once arrested some person, and the chap said to him, I know you can't do this, that and the other, because I've seen it on the bill. So that's their knowledge of policing, and now for that you can say I've seen it on EastEnders or whatever it might be.
Yeah.
So and that you're all corrupt, blah blah blah. So that's what we're dealing with. We're dealing with a much more powerful media that is passing people a view of policing that we are never going to be able to combat. So my question would then be for the next time is basically how government, because it's integral to government, how they change that. Because I, like you, fear a situation whereby we are hurtling towards public disorder, massively so.
Yeah.
And the politicians, instead of making it better, are actually heating that disorder up and making it worse. So Phil, thank you very much.
My pleasure.
And ladies and gentlemen, hopefully you will listen to us again next week.
Here is a working class spy telling his stories, the secrets, the lives of spies. Feel free to message Carlton King on all socials and give this show 5 stars on Apple iTunes and subscribe so you never miss a single episode. For your ears only.
I was a member of Her Majesty's Secret Intelligence Service.